Alright, everybody, welcome to the video. As a Lord of the Rings fan, as a 3D printing fan, as a nerd of all kinds, I undertook the project to try and make a Lord of the Rings themed pencil cup, desktop organizer, whatever you would like to call it. This was a labor of love. I love what I do, but this certainly tested my patience in a lot of ways. Took me many, many days to do. Had multiple different iterations of failed prints. Some were way not the honeycomb pattern I was going for. Some were way too thin and broke on the side here. Had all sorts of issues that I ran into, but at the end of the day, I'm so proud of this project. I thought it came out so cool. I'm so happy with it, and I'm excited that you're going to be along for the ride. So if you want to learn how to make this, stick around. It's a longer video, but it's chock full of all kinds of cool information. And again, I talk through all of the issues. If you decide to do this yourself and you have issues that pop up for you, please let me know in the comments below. Please send me an email. I would love to help you out as best I can. I think this came out so cool, and I'm looking to make a lot more things like this. So if you have any suggestions, let me know down in the comments. Other than that, let's get to work. So to begin, I measured a pencil cup I had at work just to see what like a base size would be, and I actually ended up going with that specific size. But one of the things that I ran into is when I tried to build that size, so 80 millimeters wide by 100 millimeters tall, is I ran into all sorts of issues with sizing of the drawing and such, right? So what I ended up doing, and what I'll start doing here, is when I created my initial sketch, what I did is I actually increased this by 3 times the normal size. So I did 240 millimeters wide, and then when I extruded this, I went to 300 millimeters tall. The reason being is I found it far easier to insert my drawing and then just scale it down later in Cura, as opposed to trying to do this at base size. I ran into, again, all sorts of sizing issues. This was just so much easier. And again, Cura is fine with scaling all of those things down. So once I have my base cylinder shape, what I'm going to do now is create a new sketch on the top here and just offset this design so I can make the actual opening. Now, one of the things that you have to keep in mind is for every measurement that you have, it's going to be a third when it's actually printed out. So for instance, if I created this piece on the side, if I want a like 3 millimeter gap, so to speak, I would need to make it 9 millimeters in this drawing because it's going to be decreased to 33.33% of the initial drawing. So for me, I might make this like negative 15 or 15 millimeters, just so I know that I have about a 5 millimeter gap in between that. I might go a little bit smaller. Maybe I'll do like 12 or something like that. I think that should end up being pretty nice. Yeah, that should be fine. Okay. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do 9. Call that a day. Okay. So once I have my piece done there, what I'm going to do is extrude this down. And again, I want like a 5 millimeter gap at the bottom. So what I'm going to do is do 285. And then again, have 15 millimeters between the bottom and the actual of the cup itself. So when I click enter, now I have my cylinder shape. Okay. Now my next step is going to be to insert my actual image, right? The SVG that I want to be around the outside. Okay. So in order to get the SVG, there's a couple of things that you can do. To start, you can, and what I did is I have access to Adobe Illustrator through work. So what I was able to do is take the image from the internet, trace it in Adobe Illustrator, then export that tracing as an SVG. Then all I would do is insert the SVG, and I'll show you to do that step in a second. What you could also do is you could take the image itself, you could insert that into Fusion, and then you could trace out the individual pieces using the arc tool, the line tool, spline tool, etc. Okay? Admittedly, that takes far longer than this option. But again, if all you have access to is Fusion, then this is absolutely the way to go. And it works fine. It just takes a lot longer. To add the SVG, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an offset plane away from the design. So what I want to make sure is that the design itself is going to be actually like outside of the cup. If it's inside of the cup, what will happen is it'll try and wrap the inside out, which will actually just reverse the design. So once I have this wrapped around the outside, okay, what I can do to insert my SVG then, again, just go to Insert, SVG. I have it on my flash drive saved under Test 2, so I can click on that, click Open. Just make sure I click on the plane itself. And I'm going to reverse this around, that way Gandalf is facing in the front. And then what I'm going to do is, and what you'll have to do is you'll have to mess around with this quite a bit to find the scale that works for you. Okay, I haven't found a great way to try and get it to wrap perfectly around. I tried a bunch of different ways, such as making a box that's the circumference and trying to put it outlined with the box. I just seem to have all sorts of issues. So what I did is just kind of guess and check, see how it works. So one of the best sizes that works for me was like a 3.5. Okay, 3.5 times the original size. And when I click OK, it's going to take its time to think, go through the whole process. And what I want to make sure that I'm doing is, as I go through this process, and again, I don't know why this pops up here, is I want to make sure that as I'm selecting this, if you look over top of this, it's selecting the entire outline. You'll know that you might have issues with your SVG, if you try and like hover over the inside of your piece and it tries to select the entire box, you know your SVG is probably not going to work. Either you need to make it bigger, you need to change the SVG, etc. Again, I had all kinds of troubles with the SVG. If you have issues, please put them in the comments below. I can try and help you out as much as possible with that. Okay. Now that I have that sketch finished, what I'm going to do is go up to Create, I'm going to go to Emboss, click on the actual object itself. That's my sketch profile. The face is going to be the design here. And then it usually takes a little bit, at least for my computer, to pop back up. And you can see that it pops up on screen here. Now, in order to make sure that it's lined up with the bottom, I'm going to take this arrow, just pull it down until I know it's lined up right with the bottom of the cup. Again, give it some time to think. And I actually want this to be embossed, pulled out, right? The deboss just pushes back in and like cuts out. I want this to actually build itself up off of the side. Okay, so what I'm going to do here then is I want this to be maybe 2 millimeters. So I'm going to do this at 6. Again, just so I know that everything is cut in thirds. So I know that this is going to be the proper size. Once I click OK, now I'm going to give it again a second to think, second to process, do its thing. And then for some reason OBS pops up whenever it's doing that. As you can see that I have the full fellowship and Bill, the horse there, the entire way around. Now, I'll talk about what I'm going to do with this gap here in just a little bit, okay? But again, I think that's a good starting point here. Now, next step, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually put this little ring around the top part here, okay? So that little ring is actually going to be where the names of the fellowship people are, okay? So in order to go through that process, I'm simply going to create a sketch right on the top part here. And I'm going to click on the top, and I'm going to do 2 separate circles. Click on the circle here. I start with one that's going to be exactly lined up with the outer edge, and then I'm going to do one that's just inside of the outer part there. That way it's, instead of just putting directly on the outside, I want a little bit that's going to stretch kind of and push itself into the design rather than just trying to be right on the outside. That way through the printing process, I know it's going to stay stable. Now, once I get off to this side here, I'm going to hit escape to get out of my circles. Hover just along the outside, like that as well. I'm going to extrude, and then I'm going to pull that down. I believe I did, oops. I'm going to click that, change that to join. And I'm going to change that to, I believe what we're going to do is 50. I think 50 is a pretty good option. To do 60 last time. I think I'm going to go with 60 instead. Okay. So now that I have 60, you can see that I have that kind of lip around the entire side. If I look at it from the top, hopefully it lines up perfectly, which it looks like it does. It doesn't show any of the fellowship below it. I think that looks really nice. Now, we're going to come back and do a little bit with the fillets on the outside, but we don't want to do that yet. I'll show you why in just a second. Okay, but now it's going to be time to work on the actual honeycomb pattern, the actual hexagon pattern itself. So let's get started on that. All right, so let's start working on the actual pattern itself. Now, the pattern part drove me nuts trying to figure out as well. I looked at all kinds of different YouTube videos. I went, again, all over the place trying to figure out what's the best way, what's the easiest way to do this. I happened across a phenomenal video. You can see some screenshots of that on screen now, and I'll link it in the description below. It was by far the easiest and most knowledgeable video I've seen. That taught me a lot about different things that I didn't know Fusion has, such as parameters. I had no idea that was a thing. Take a look at that video. I'll try to go through how I utilized that video, but I highly encourage you to watch it. It was terrific. Okay, so what we're going to do to start is I'm going to hide this specific body that I'm working on now, okay? And I'm going to create a sketch, okay? Now, as I create that sketch, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the circumference of my object, okay? So my circumference, again, what I just did is I went into Google and I searched up circumference calculator, and the radius of my design right now is 120 millimeters. So I went that is not 120, okay? So the circumference that I'm left with is 753.98224, okay? So what I want to do then is determine, okay, if I have my circumference, I want, let's say, 15 rows of hexagons. So what I'm going to do is, in order to find out what one of those hexagon widths is going to be, is I'm going to look at the total circumference and divide that by 15. Okay. Once I'm going to do that, I'm going to take the total height, which is going to be 300, which is the standard height that I'm working with. Okay, the same height as my design. And the width of one of these bars is going to be 50.2654827. Okay, so that leaves me again with just the one single bar, and then we're going to make a circular pattern that wraps the entire way around. Okay, so when I'm working through this, then what I'm going to start by doing is I'm going to attach the midpoint of this design to the center of my origin. Okay, that just makes sure that everything is wrapped together. And as we're working through these constraints with this specific part, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fix one side of this shape. Okay, that way I know that it's not going to start moving itself around. Okay, now I'm going to start by creating that hexagon pattern. Okay, so I'm going to go to polygon, circumscribe polygon, and I'm going to change the line type to construction. Right, construction lines simply mean that it's going to be lines that we can base our drawing off of. It's not going to show up in the print. It's not going to show up in my final design. They're just essentially lines that we can use to base the rest of our design off of. So if I change that to a construction line, I'm just going to make a hexagon out onto the side here. Doesn't really matter what size it is right now. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this line. Again, I'm going to go midpoint, piece here, set that to the midpoint there, do the exact same thing on the other side, and now I have my hexagon the same size as my design here. Okay, it's going to fit within the shape, everything looks great. Okay, next step then is going to be to create the upper edges of it, right? So I'm going to make a piece that comes out and over, that way it starts my other sides. Okay, so I'm going to create a line. Again, they don't have to be perfect right now. Okay, we are going to make them perfect later. One of the things that, again, I ran into a big issue is I found that sometimes Fusion will actually add designs or constraints in for you. So in my instance, previously when I was doing this, it added a perpendicular constraint right here. Okay, so when I tried to use this next constraint tool, it told me it was over constrained, and I couldn't quite figure out why until I realized that if you end up with a constraint you don't want, say for instance, I don't want this constraint here, or this one on the side, what I can do is just click on that constraint, hit the delete key, and then it deletes themselves. Okay, so I actually do want those, so I'm going to Command Z back so I have them. Okay, now I'm going to use the equal tool, the equal constraint, to make sure that the size that I have previously is going to be continued around the entire design. So for instance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit equal, or I'm going to select my individual tool, or individual lines, excuse me, on the side here. And now when I'm using the equal tool, the last line I select is going to be what it bases the equal off of, right? So I selected all four of these. This was the last one I selected. So all of the lines I have selected are going to be the same size as this line here. So click that equal tool, and you can see that everything is based now off of this specific line here. So now I'm going to start working on the actual pattern itself. So I'm going to utilize that offset tool, okay? And I'm going to start making my offset hexagons. Okay, now what we need to figure out here is a couple different things. Okay, first off, again, the distance between these is going to be a third, right? So if I make my distance between, I'm going to do 9, okay, but a third of that's going to be 3. So my distance once I print this is going to be 3 millimeters in between. Okay, another issue is going to be it has to be half of the distance. Okay, so what's going to happen is you can see the start of the offset here. It's going to be the same thing on this side. So essentially, if I want a 9 millimeter gap between, I need 4.5 on one side, 4.5 on the other to make that 9. That way it's nice and uniform the entire way around. So I'm going to make this -4.5. That makes my initial shape on the outside. I always forget to do this. I need to make sure I change my shape back, or my line back from construction lines to project lines. So make sure you deselect construction line, -4.5. There you go. Now I have the start of my design. Do the exact same thing, just wrapping around the sides here. Oops, why is that not what the heck? Now it works. Fusion is so wacky sometimes. Alright, 4.5. Do the exact same thing on the other side here. Offset that. -4.5. Oh. Now, I have the start of my design, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit my T for trim tool, and I'm just going to make sure I knock off all of these pieces on the side. That way everything just kind of stays contained within the outside of my design. Alright, so now that I have my individual pieces ready to go, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a line from this point here right to my end point. And I'll show you why in a second when we do the rectangular pattern tool. This is going to set my spacing and my distance. Okay, so there's a couple different ways you can access tools. Obviously you have this up here. You can also hit the S for search, and I'm going to type in rectangular pattern tool. Okay, the objects that I'm going to select in order to make the pattern go up and down are going to be the actual project lines themselves, not the construction lines. So I'm just going to go, I'm holding shift right now, going around and selecting all of these lines. Okay, my next step is going to click where it says directions. Click on the line that I made previously. That'll just show that it's trying to go up and down rather than side to side. Now my next step here is going to be to set the distance between these two pieces. So I want to change this, make sure that this distribution part says spacing, not extent. Extent means the distance between the first and the last one. Spacing just means the distance between the center points of one and the other. So make sure it's on spacing. Now for the actual distance itself, what I want to do is click the three dots next to distance. I'm going to click measure, and then I want to utilize this piece, the line that we drew earlier, as that measurement. So once I click on this, you can see that it populates two designs going down this side here. Total of 3, right? The first one, second one, third one. Okay. Now, I want to make sure that one goes up as well. So change your distance here to symmetric, or your direction, excuse me. Okay. Now it'll do 3 again. As it does 3, it'll do 1 on top, 1 on bottom. I want to add a fourth one so that I ensure that it's going to be the entire way through my box. Okay. Next step here, I'm going to click OK, is if you're looking at the bottom of this side here, again, you might not be able to see it, okay, but there is a small piece on the outside. I don't want the bottom of this design to be directly in line with the bottom, right? If I keep that hexagon pattern going, it'll actually cut down through and it'll be an uneven close to the bottom. So what I want to do is I want the bottom of my cup to line up with the bottom of this pattern. So what I'm going to do is measure up a 15 millimeter line up and then cut that over. Now what I can do is I'm going to use my trim tool and just ensure that my design stops at that line. So now I'll have a nice clean cut at the bottom rather than having a super weird design. Even this one here isn't perfect, okay? But this will make everything look super clean, super nice the entire way around. First off, just want to say thanks for sticking around so far in the video. If you're enjoying this and you are enjoying the video and you're enjoying creating your own Lord of the Rings nerd-themed pencil cup desk organizer, I would love it if you would subscribe and like the video. I'm trying to grow the channel, so I'd really appreciate any help that you could provide. If you have any questions, comments, again, please make sure you're leaving them in the comments below, and I would love to hear any feedback that you have, good or otherwise. So thank you so much for watching, and let's get back to it. So now that I've finished my sketch, I have everything good to go, I'm going to go through and just select all of the actual hexagon pieces themselves. Now again, these pieces, these half hexagon pieces, are actually going to combine themselves later as we continue that circular pattern around. They'll just meet up with other hexagons going the entire way around. So as I've selected each of these pieces, and again, it's different than the video because I don't want this part, I want these because they're going to cut the entire way through. I'm going to bring my body back into view. As I bring this body back into view, I'm going to go to Create, and go to Emboss. My face is going to be the outside of this. And as I select this, you can see that it is currently embossed out. I want it to deboss. So click on that deboss. And then what I'm going to do is make sure that it's coming through just by clicking OK. And currently it's not. If it's not, that's totally fine. Right click, edit feature. I'm just going to go to -10. And as you can see, this cuts through very, very nicely. Okay. So as I go back into edit feature, what I want to do is, again, this is personal preference. I want this to start in this open area here, just so I have a clean pattern to base everything off of. So if I go to this back part here, if you drag this around, it'll actually move this piece for you. So I can look back down. I think that's lined up fairly well. It might not be perfect, but it's very close. Now I can click OK, and I have the start of that pattern directly in line with the open area in the back of the cup. Next step here now is just to make a circular pattern tool with this feature itself. So if I go to circular pattern tool, okay, my object type, make sure that says features. Again, this is a feature that we've made. And now, oops, features, I'm going to make sure that I select just this piece here. Now it's tough sometimes. You got to make sure again that you're directly on the pattern itself. My axis here, I'm going to select the top part. And now I already, like we talked about earlier, I want 15 rows of hexagons. So I took my circumference, which was 753.98224, right? Divided by 15, which gave me the size of one row of hexagons. Okay. Now, when I go to my circular pattern tool now, to make sure they line up perfectly, is I just make 15 additional copies of that, or I'm sorry, 15 total copies. Okay. And now I know that when I click OK, and when it gets some time to think, what's going to happen is everything is going to line up perfectly. We'll get that back out of there. So you can see, as I rotate around, everything lines up perfectly. All my hexagons look great. My honeycomb pattern is perfect the entire way around. Just doing a little bit of basic math helps this thing come out perfectly. Okay, again, check out that video. I'll have it linked below. It is incredible. Talks about parameters, which I didn't know were a thing. It's funny, I had another video I did where a comment was about how I didn't constrain my sketches. Just haven't worked with constraints often. This showed me how powerful those are, and I definitely will use those in the future. Just a phenomenal video. Absolutely recommend checking that out. All right, we're wrapping up closer to the build part. We're still going to talk Cura settings here in a little bit just for the full project, but next step is going to be the actual name around the outside of the cup. Okay, so you can see I have the name of the fellowship. It's not super in focus, but every member of the fellowship, minus Bill, is on here. So we're going to make that actual cutout around the outside. Okay, so I'm going to create a sketch. I'm going to click on the plane that's in line with this design here. And then I'm going to create, go to text, and I'm going to back out quite a bit because I'm going to make this text pretty big. Now I'll have to adjust this a little bit here as it goes, but I will show you all that process here in a little bit. Okay. Now I very much prefer this play ball text. What I'm looking for is text that is similar to the text around the ring, right? The Elvish, I guess not Elvish, it's the language of Mordor, around the ring itself. I want kind of that feeling is what I'm going for. So as I do that, then I'm going to go in the order of the fellowship. Now I may have to make a bigger text box, and I'll go through that if I do. I actually think I definitely do, so maybe I'll try and make this a little bit bigger now. Again, I can always decrease the size of the text. The text box is a little bit harder. I'm going to go with that. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go with Aragorn because he's at the back. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit space, And then I want a floating period, a middle period, I believe it's called, in between each name. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold an Alt, and I believe it's, if you hold an Alt and go 0183 and release Alt, it'll add one of those periods there in the middle. So I'm going to have those in between each name. So next is going to be Sam, Alt, 0183, release, make that. And I'm going to go through the entire fellowship in order that they would appear in the silhouette picture. All right, so coming back into this here, all right, I have made all the text, made everything look how I want, and I'm going to come back and adjust this later. So I have the text, everything how I want it to. My next step now is I need to make sure that the text box itself is going to be outside of the confines of the circle. If I don't, and it's in the middle here, what's going to happen is it's actually going to wrap itself around the inside of it and just be completely reversed. Okay, so you'll have it on the outside here, but it'll just be completely reversed. I have a video about that if you're interested. It's a super short one. Ask me how long that took. But what I'm going to do is just click on this, go into modify. I'm going to move this just, again, outside of the confines of that. It doesn't really matter where exactly it is. Now that, shoot. Okay, now what I can do is I'm going to create. I'm going to go to emboss, click on the text itself, click faces, click on the outside there. And one of these, as you can see here, it came up with a self-intersecting body at the bottom. So with this type of text, what I found that in some types of text, what you have to do is if you right-click on the sketch itself, go to Edit Sketch, I'm going to zoom in, double-click on the text, there's a character spacing option here. Try different numbers in there. So I think I did 15. And when I click OK, I'm going to do the exact same step I did earlier and see if that, see if that fixed it. Sometimes you just have to separate the letters, or else when it kind of wraps around, it thinks that multiple things are trying to cover over themselves, right? So you just want to make sure that everything has its own area and isn't going to wrap itself around. So let's try and see if that works there. It looks like it's actually going to be okay. Pops up on the bottom here. Usually takes a little bit longer. As you can see, comes out looking pretty nice there. Now, I'm going to deboss this. I want this to cut back into the shape itself. I don't want this popping out. Again, I think it looks much, much better if it's attached back into the design. Okay, now I'm going to let that go through it. Let it think for a little bit. One thing I will caution you about is as this project goes on further and further, your computer will struggle just because unless you have a really, really good computer, it will struggle because there's a lot of things to try and process. Okay. Now, you can see there's a couple issues that I have like this. I don't necessarily like how combined these two are. So I might actually Command Z back out of that. Right click, go Edit Sketch, double click, and maybe I'll change this down to 15 or something like that, and maybe a smaller character spacing. Oops. Just maybe see how that looks. Again, you might get different issues. You might get things that pop up that you might have to slightly adjust, but I'm going to just mess around with this until I think it looks good. Sometimes I'm not the smartest. I need to do this the exact opposite way I did it earlier. Wait. No, I don't. I'm okay. Never mind. All right. So once I have this, once I have this made here, okay, I'm just gonna make sure everything looks nice. There, I think this looks much better. I like the gap in between because what I'm actually going to show is once this kind of goes through its whole process here, and maybe I should have just done this initially, is I can actually move that gap to the gap that I already have in my design. And what I mean by that is if I right click on this emboss feature and go to edit, I'm going to line this part up again with that open area that I have. And you can mess around with making those sizes of the picture, for instance, better. That way you don't have that gap. I actually don't mind it, which is why I don't necessarily think I want to change it. But now that I have this, what I can do is use that blue arrow, and I'm just going to move this text around so like everybody's name is close enough to write over top of their character in the silhouette. So if I leave that there, again, not everything's going to be perfect for sure, but if for me, if I have Aragorn and Gandalf close enough to themselves, then everybody else, for the most part, will line up pretty well. Okay, so again, let that do its computing. Let that go through its thing. I don't know why it keeps popping up OBS, whatever. But now you can see I have everybody's name around the entirety of the design here. Why won't that let me orbit? Okay, well. But you can see how that kind of, I think that came out really, really cool. Okay, now, my next and final step of the actual build is I'm going to take away a lot of these sharper edges here. Okay, so I'm going to use my fillet tool. I'm going to click on the inside, click on the outside, and then I'm going to click on this bottom one here. And I'm just going to mess around with some different numbers. I think I did 7 the last time. Not quite, because you can see I have this little last part there. I might go 8. That way it kind of wraps itself around nicely. I think that looks really good. Excuse me. I think the bottom of this looks really good. I'm happy with how that came out. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change that up a little bit. And I saw a little gap that I didn't like between the connections here. So what I'm going to do instead is make these 2 separates. So I'm going to go here and here, make those an 8mm fillet. And then I'm going to change this bottom one here to a separate fillet that doesn't cut into this part here. So let me try something. Maybe we'll do half, maybe we'll go 4. I think that looks really good. I think that's nice. It's not going to cut into there. I think that's ideal in my opinion. And click OK, and that's it. So again, you can modify this however you want. You can make your own design. You can make your own pattern. Whatever it is, I think this looks really cool. I'm really, really proud of this on my end. Again, I might move some things over. Maybe I'll move this a little bit, etc. But for the most part, I'm really happy with how this came out. I'm proud of this. I think it looks so sick. And as a Lord of the Rings nerd, I'm very happy with how this came out. All right, so as the build is wrapped up, what we need to do is export this file so that we can get it over to Cura, talk settings, and get this thing on the printer. So if I head up here to File, 3D Print, it'll open up this dialog box on the right hand side here. A couple things to keep in mind. I always keep this unchecked. I've never set it up to send directly to Cura. You're more than welcome to do that. But what I'm going to do is just make sure my unit type is set to millimeters because I designed this in millimeters. I'm going to make sure it transitions over to Cura fine. But after you make sure that's set, just click on the design itself, click OK. And what I'm going to do is save this to my desktop, and I'm going to save this as LOTR cup. Hit save. I already have one. That was my old one. I'm going to click yes, and we should be good to go. So I'll meet you over in Cura, and we'll discuss some settings. All right, so I have Cura open here. If you're at this point in the video, I'm going to assume that you have a working knowledge of 3D printing, Cura, all that fun stuff. Just make sure the printer that you're sending to is selected over here. And then my next step is going to be to go File, Open Files, my Lord of the Rings cup here. Now, again, we talked about how we're making this substantially larger than what we need to, simply because we know it's going to shrink down to save ourselves some headache with design work. So I just go to Scale. I'm going to type in 33.33%, hit Enter, and then you can see that my design shrinks down to what it actually is going to be printable size. Okay. So now I'm just going to zoom in here take a look at all kinds of my different designs. Now, the reason we do a hexagon pattern is because we can program Cura to not put supports in between each of these areas, right? Because the angle of the hexagons are such that support doesn't necessarily need to print in those, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what I mean, and we can adjust these settings accordingly. Is right now I'm going to put support as normal. My placement is going to be, actually I'm going to do tree supports. My placement's going to be everywhere. And I'm going to slice this just so I can show you, oops, I'm going to set this to normal as well. I'm going to slice this just so I can show you what it might look to you as it's rendering. All right, so finally finished. 15 hours, 25 minutes. What I'm going to do is go to preview. Okay, and as you can see, there's going to be, as it stands, there's going to be structure, support structure, that goes between every single hexagon. Now, in order to decrease drastically the amount of supports that are used, the amount of print time, and the headache trying to clean these up later, what I'm going to do is change this placement. I'm going to go to just touching build plate. That way there's nothing that prints on the inside. That way we don't have to worry about anything adhering to the bottom there. Now, my next step is I'm going to go to show custom here. If you don't have access to all these settings, 3 lines on the right hand side, click on that, and we're going to go to all. Right? That way we have access to all of our settings. Everything's good to go there. So I'm going to go to support. Okay? And as you are looking through support, there's a couple different areas you may want to look at. Okay? First off might be your branch density itself. So in order to see what the branch density is, that's how much material is going to be inside of each of the branches. Right? The smaller the density, the easier it's going to be to remove, the less material, but the less supported it's going to be. Okay? What we're looking for then is this area here, the support overhang angle. Okay? That is going to be, as it says, the minimum angle of overhangs for which support is added. Okay? 90% will not add any support, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to increase this, I believe it's 60, to a point where I don't get any overhang or any support added within my hexagons. Okay, so I'm going to let that render, see you back here, or slice, and we'll see you back here in just a second. Okay, so that wasn't quite it. So what I'm going to do is just continue to add onto this until I know that I don't have support structure in each individual hexagon. So here, again, you can see it's an extra hour, an extra 15 grams of filament for what I believe would be some additional support would be, in my opinion, well worth it. So one of the additional things that, if you want to get super particular, super nitty gritty, I know we've kept adding to this, is if you see this seam here, this is called your Z seam. So what this is where your printer will come and continue to stop and then start a new layer. So this will kind of be a little bit easier to see, and it's going to be very difficult to see here, but yeah, no way. But that'll be kind of like a line in your print. So what I'm trying to do is just align this, and you'll kind of have to guess and check. At least I haven't found a good system for figuring out where the heck this needs to go. But I'm currently aligning that Z seam. I just looked in my profile, or looked at my settings, searched seam, and I'm changing that Y placement to be in that back empty zone, right? Because this is going to be the back of my design here, right? Where there's a gap in between the names. So I want that Z seam to be there. That's going to be the back of my cup. It's going to be pushed against my desk. I won't see it. I won't know it's there. Again, just trying to be a little bit over particular right now. And I don't need to be perfect. This looks great to me. So you can see this Z seam right here. Again, don't need it perfect. Just need it kind of in that gap. That way there's plenty of space for everything to look ideal. Okay, so again, that's the video. That's the print. Thank you all very much for watching. Again, I'm very proud of this here. It took me a lot longer than I thought it would. If you don't want to make your own, I will have this linked down below on Thingiverse. You're welcome to grab it, modify it, print it. I'd love to see the pictures of what you do. So send me an email, kennedydiy01@gmail.com. I'd love to see what you make based off of this. Again, this took me forever to do, much longer than it should have. But if you have questions, if you have anything that pops up that you're not sure how to do, send me an email, tag me in the comments. I'd love to give you a hand on this. But thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you learned something. I know I certainly did. If you have anything else you want me to make, if you have any other problem you want me to try and solve, let me know. I'd love to tackle it. And if you enjoyed the video and you stuck with me to the very end, first off, thank you. And second, I would love it if you liked and subscribed. Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate it, and we'll catch you in the next video.